Here's Luba, the founder of Upthink Coaching, and we continue our conversations with coaches and interview series that is meant to demonstrate different coaching niches, different approaches, meet practitioners working in different niches and approaches, and gain their firsthand experience about what's it like, what do they do. And this is for those coaches who look for more professional development, who are curious about other approaches, or who look for interesting practices and models to integrate in their own coaching practice. And today I'm very happy to introduce wonderful Sofia Xavier, a certified coach currently living in Bangkok, but pretty much practicing globally around the world. And the conversation we're going to have today with Sofia is going to be about Jungian coaching. Sofia, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Yes, Luba, thank you very much for having me today. I'm very excited about this conversation. And you know very well my passion for Jungian coaching and, digging deeper into the mind and, exploring different approaches to coaching. So yeah, I look forward to this conversation. So my name is Sofia Xavier. I'm from Portugal originally. I've been living in Asia for about 9 years. So I also spent 7 years in China before moving to Thailand, where I currently live. So my approach to coaching is very holistic. It's based in Jungian psychology, which we will explore during this conversation, but also based on other methodologies that I've learned over the years, including hypnosis, NLP, ICF, like foundational coaching as well, and other systemic approaches such as family constellations, and so on. I'm also the founder of Piko Academy, which focuses on intergenerational healing and a conscious approach to leadership as well, and education. And I also collaborate with an organization called the World Academy for the Future of Women. So we train women worldwide in leadership, and that's very exciting. Last year, I spent some time in Mexico, India. This year, I'm heading to Kenya very soon as well, to do another training there. So yeah, currently I basically work globally, and I really enjoy that. So this is a little bit about me.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm sure we are about to find out more. So in this episode, I particularly would like to focus on Jungian coaching because I haven't seen a lot of practitioners doing that. And having some interest in psychoanalysis myself, basically, that's within my own therapy journey. I would really love to explore how this works in coaching. So maybe to begin with, could you outline just in broad strokes, what is Jungian coaching about? And how is it different from Jungian therapy or psychoanalysis?
So Jungian coaching is basically bringing the depth of Jungian psychology into a coaching context. So putting it simply, that's it, right? So there's a lot of concepts from Jungian psychology, shadow work, the concept of shadow, the concept of the collective unconscious, the individual unconscious. So that idea that there's a lot of data beneath the surface of our mind, right? So that idea that we have the conscious mind, everything that we are aware of, but then we also have the unconscious mind where we store everything that we have experienced, and all the experiences that were sometimes not necessarily as positive, but they impacted us somehow. So everything is stored in the unconscious mind, which is really, I usually say, under the carpet, right? So it's that idea that sometimes everything looks good on the surface, but there's a lot under the carpet. And so what we do in Jungian psychology is really working under the carpet. So we don't only focus on the surface. We really go deeper into the deeper layers of the mind. We work with archetypes, which is a topic that I'm very passionate about as well, which are models of the psyche. And I think it's a process that really requires a lot of trust, because especially when we work with more logically inclined clients, there's still, a bit of skepticism, or, some clients may have a little bit more of resistance, exactly because, we are navigating deeper waters. So it's fascinating. For me personally, I've always been really fascinated with the unconscious mind. But when we work with the psyche and those deeper unconscious dynamics, sometimes some people may have a little bit of more resistance, as I'm saying. So I think both for the coach and the coachee, it is a process that requires a lot more trust in the process than any other approach to coaching that I've been trained in and experienced myself. Then I would say that in terms of differences between, Jungian coaching and the traditional ICF coaching, I would say that, ICF is still there, especially for my training in Jungian coaching. So I think the code of ethics, everything that has to do with structure of a coaching session, presence, deep listening, agreements, and setting agreements, keeping the agreements, setting the goals. Even the action plan, all of that, it's still there, right? So that is sort of the structure of the session. It's pretty much the same, but then the tools that we use are a bit different. So I think, in my perspective, they are really, they go deeper, and they bypass the conscious mind, which I think a lot of times in traditional coaching, the conscious mind can get in the way of really accessing certain contents that we have within. So because we use symbolic thinking, we basically dialogue with the unconscious, right? We speak a lot to the unconscious directly. And so by using metaphors, by using stories, by using cards with pictures and abstract concepts, we are bypassing that resistance and going straight to the unconscious mind. And so that's, I think, a key difference from this approach to any other approach, or to the traditional approaches to coaching.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing. That's insightful and quite intriguing. I have tons of questions. Well, actually, I guess when coaches use the basic level of coaching and they work with tools, then probably the depth that you are talking about may not necessarily be there because it's more transactional. However, I guess what you've described is very applicable to more advanced coaching, even if it uses the ICF framework, because using metaphors, using images, using intuition, using bodily intelligence, using images, right, that emerge in your mind as you are talking, they're all part of the coaching process, and they're all mentioned in the core coaching competencies. You mentioned some tools, and I was really curious about what specific tools you use in Jungian coaching. And I know that you are going through training that's also ICF accredited, so that's pretty much supports the model that maybe most of our viewers are going to use. So I'm really curious in the tools within that approach.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you just said. I think advanced coaching is very much, a lot closer to Jungian coaching in that sense, especially, because I think it has a lot to do with intuition in a sense. So I think in Jungian coaching, there's a lot more of following your intuition, of trusting the process, of really paying a lot of attention to what's not said, right? Of the nonverbal cues, all of that. So I do agree with that. I think the tools and the concepts that are very specific from Jungian coaching, or Jungian psychology, right? That's what really separates traditional coaching from Jungian coaching. So an exercise that we do a lot in Jungian coaching is the chair exercise, where basically, so let's say the client, so we start the session, we establish the agreement, right? So we go through all those stages as a normal, traditional, conventional coaching session. And then we start working with metaphors, right? So let's say we tell the client to close their eyes and to think about an image. What comes to mind in terms of an image, right? And then they start describing, especially if they are more open to the process. Again, as I said, some clients may be a bit more skeptical, a bit more resistant, but most clients will be able to come up with an image. And then we, out of that image, they get to, let's say, choose a part of that image or a word that came up, and then establish a dialogue with that concept. So let's say if the person closed their eyes and they imagined a desert, and that desert, then we can bring that to the chair exercise and have them switch sides in between, as the client and as the coach. So taking turns, but it's just the client doing that basically, and we are mediating the conversation. So we are guiding them through the process, but it's them who are speaking to the desert, and the desert replies. And so it usually is a very insightful conversation. And there's a lot of information, a lot of data coming up to the surface. And it's usually a quite powerful exercise that we use in Jungian coaching. Another exercise and another tool that I think it's not necessarily only used in Jungian coaching, but it's also very used in Jungian coaching, is cards. The use of cards with images, so very symbolic images, very abstract in a way, and each one of them also has, feminine, masculine polarities to them. So there are the feminine cards, the masculine cards, because in Jungian psychology, there's these concepts of the animus and the anima, which are basically the yin and yang, right? So in Eastern philosophy, in Chinese philosophy, we have the yin and yang, the feminine and the masculine polarities, which exist within all of us, right? And so those coaching cards usually work on those challenges, especially when the client comes up with imbalances in the psyche in terms of polarities, in terms of feminine or masculine, especially these days, because I think there's a lot of imbalance. I see, clients coming up with issues in terms of, especially women. I get to work with women that tend to be a lot in their masculine, because of course to work we use a lot of our masculine energy, but then when it comes to relationships, they usually find that it's very hard sometimes to get the type of partner that they would like to, because of that imbalance, because that's affecting not only their professional lives, but then they are bringing that to romantic, personal relationships. And so through the cards, we can really analyze those processes, and yeah, and generate new perspectives, new insights, and that's very powerful.
Thank you for sharing. I especially like that you provided a very practical example of a scenario. What could be typical request, or maybe not a typical request, but what kind of request would Jungian coaching most effective with, or quite effective with? And, you know, if we don't take into account more kind of cognitive based approaches, right? Could you provide a few more examples of suitable topics? And when I say suitable topics, I guess I mean the topics where it would make sense to use this particular approach, and it could be beneficial for the client to work on their issue or on their change with help of Jungian coaching and a Jungian coach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say that most of the challenges are life coaching challenges. What I experience are pretty much the same types of challenges, blocks, in life, periods of transition, change. So it ends up being, similar to traditional coaching. But what I notice is that a lot of clients, uh, they look for a different approach, to an approach that goes a little bit deeper or beyond the conventional, because they've tried other approaches and they didn't necessarily find resonance. I personally am a very creative person, and I tend to like more of these type of approaches that go deeper into the subconscious mind and the unconscious mind, and the unconscious dynamics and all of that. And I personally found a lot of fulfillment and a lot of, I felt that I found my approach to coaching when I found Jungian coaching, because all of a sudden I was bringing what I had learned in hypnosis, even psychoanalysis, other approaches, right, to healing and other modalities, to coaching. So it felt like, something that was more aligned.
Complete.
Yeah, complete, more
Yeah.
whole for me. And I do feel that a lot of clients naturally are more inclined to this particular approach, right? Or other approaches. I do think that even, more somehow spiritualized people that are more inclined to spiritual practices, or that have a less logical mind, not so, they don't have that logical side, they live more with the heart, right? So I usually, divide, or like to say, people who lead with the heart, or people who lead with the mind, right? Of course, we have both, but and I do feel that that kind of clients usually feel more inclined to Jungian coaching, and especially if they have been feeling like, there's patterns in their lives that have been repeating over and over again, and they tried therapy, they tried, other approaches to healing, other types of coaching, but they didn't find the answers that they were looking for. Then they find Jungian coaching, and they're like, okay, this looks like something that can bring more awareness, that can bring more answers. And so I think that's the kind of clients that usually look for that. And even in terms of practitioners, I see, people that worked with tarot cards, that worked with, hypnosis, hypnotherapists, psychoanalysts, even Jungian analysts, that are looking to just advance their careers and bring something new to their careers. I think, I've been learning with them, and it's very fascinating. I myself, even way before starting my journey into coaching, from my teenage years, I remember using tarot cards to really communicate with the unconscious mind, and trying to interpret the cards and trying to understand what they mean. And it's interesting that tarot, if you understand like Jungian psychology, it sort of backs up tarot cards, because basically we are communicating with our unconscious mind through the cards and through a principle of synchronicity that Carl Jung also, it was very central in Jungian psychology. The idea that nothing is a coincidence, everything is aligned somehow. There's this synchronicity was very central in his work, and so it's very interesting to see how that also connects to tarot, for instance, and other methodologies.
Well, that's interesting. Well, thank you. So from what I understand, it's not the type of request, or it's not a type of a topic or a question that a person has. It's more about the way that they want to use to arrive at their answer, right? And it's if a person would love to try an alternative path to solve the challenge that they're facing. And I can totally relate to that. I'm very super logical person, and with a very kind of strong cognitive side. And definitely if a question can be solved with logic, most of the time I don't need a coach to support me with that, right? Because I can guide myself quite far, right?
Yeah.
However, there are topics or there are questions where I'm getting stuck as well, right? We are all humans, none of us knows everything. And for me, when I realized that there are certain questions that I keep bringing to coaching, maybe with different coaches, and I'm getting no solutions, I'm getting no progress, I'm getting no answers. And I don't feel that coaching is helping, because I guess I can ask all these questions myself, right? And that's how I arrived at the clean language. And my way of kind of getting the answers was working with a clean practitioner, where she asks me, oh, think of a metaphor that describes your situation, and then I don't even bring a topic to a session, I bring a metaphor to a session, and then we spend a whole hour describing the metaphor and setting it into action and giving it some motion, and communicating, engaging with this metaphor and seeing how that develops. And I found that very, very insightful. So that way could definitely support me in topics where I'm getting stuck logically. And since I have this own experience, right, I promote this in our coach training programs a lot, saying that we can't just use only one type of questioning in our sessions, or we can't always appeal to the logical mind, because everything that happens in a person's life, there's a lot happening beyond logic. I mean, if we all use logic in our life would be very, very structured, and we would face probably no challenges, right? So I'm always in for introducing more somatic work, imagery work, even clean language, work with emotions, so that coaches could be more well-rounded in their approaches. So after listening to you, I'm guessing this Jungian type of work is another approach that many coaches could benefit from, because we all get clients sometimes that cannot progress with a cognitive way, or maybe with imagery, or with other methods that a coach uses. So I guess the more approaches we are familiar with, and the more we can use them in a productive way for the client, the better for the client. But I also got a question, you know, Sophia, after listening to you, how do we, or I guess, how do you as a Jungian coach, and because you're in community of Jungian coaches, right? So you can share that experience. How do you ensure that these practices are safe for a client? Because I guess here what emerges for me is, how do we make sure our approach is trauma informed, that we don't go that deep so that we re-traumatize the client, because coaches are not therapists, right? And many coaches don't have the training maybe to sense the boundary where it starts to get dangerous for the client, and where we kind of cross the line into those waters that we cannot navigate because we are not trained to do that. Could you elaborate on this a little bit?
Yes, I think you touched on a very important point. So we are not therapists, and that is, that is very different. One thing is therapy, one thing is Jungian coaching. We still touch on a lot of things that are the same, right? Because it's based in Jungian psychology, but the approach is different, and the boundaries are different. And I think as a coach, again, that's why I mentioned the code of ethics, right? And why it's so important that we have a structure beyond just, Jungian psychology concepts, right? We actually have our ICF structure as a backbone, as a, just a very much the foundation for this approach. So I think the biggest difference is that, in Jungian coaching, we don't diagnose, we don't treat or manage any mental health conditions. And we also make sure we work with high functioning, individuals. So we are not working with people that, I've had, for instance, I'll give you an example. I had a potential client that came to me, and we had a discovery session, and he thought that Jungian coaching was, basically therapy, right? So I think it was not very clear for him about the scope of the work. And so he came with, depression and anxiety and really deep wounds. And of course, I had to redirect him to a professional therapist, right? And making clear to him that that was not within the scope of my work. So I think as a coach, that's why it's so important to learn. I think Jungian coaching is not good for, a good start for someone who wants to become a coach. I think it should be something that you use after you have your foundation in coaching, in clean coaching, let's say, more of a clean approach to coaching. Once you have that structure very clear, once you have that structure solid, and you have some experience in coaching, then yes, you can go ahead and learn, other approaches. But I think the fact that I've done, my training in coaching with you, right, in ICF coaching, it gave me really a very solid foundation. And now I always use that, as the essence of my sessions, the very foundation of my sessions. But then I like to add my flavor of coaching, my techniques, the techniques that I learned from different approaches, and of course from Jungian psychology that has been central in my work. So from my perspective as a coach and a professional coach, you need to follow a code of ethics. And within that code of ethics, of course, you need to have the maturity also to understand what are the boundaries between therapy and coaching, and especially in Jungian coaching, because as you said very well, it's easy to blur the lines. It's easy to sometimes, just not sure if we should go there, if we should not go there. So I think that's very important, especially because there's a lot of Jungian analysts people trained in Jungian psychology who then become Jungian coaches. And that's the challenging part. I think more than for me that I've never been like trained as a Jungian analyst. I think for people who have done, who are therapists themselves, sometimes setting those boundaries is harder.
I
So that.
totally agree with you. I have firsthand experience of this because when I was trained in coaching, when I went through my first coach training, the organization where I chose to have my training specialized on training mental health professionals in coaching. And because I was in a cohorts with many mental health professionals, I have observed that the habit of, of maybe practicing counseling or therapy was quite strong, right? And that the coaching model felt a bit maybe restrictive to them. And we also have quite a few coaching students, coaches in training who are either therapists or counselors. And I can see the struggle where they, especially in the modern world where so many therapeutic or counseling approaches are non-directive and very much partnering with a client, right? It's not always easy to draw the line. And I think you have a wonderful point here. Another thing I got very interested in is client resistance, because you mentioned it a couple of times earlier, and then you gave that example of a chair exercise, which I think is also common in Gestalt therapy. I guess it's one of the most popular techniques there as well. And I remember when I worked with one of my therapists, and I really like, to have this line of this self-discovery through ongoing therapy. One of my therapists was using a psychodynamic no, it's not a psychodynamic approach. She used psychodrama. And psychodrama is very similar to what you described. So if you notice something like, in your story, like the image of a desert. So imagine the desert is talking to you and you're replying back. And I guess I was never good at that as a client, because I sense that all this conversation that is happening between, say, desert and me, it's imaginary. It's not authentic. I'm just making that up. And I'm like, oh no, I really don't want to do that, because I think I'm just imagining that. Like, what's the point, right? And I guess I myself experienced the resistance that could be similar to what you are talking about. So I really would love to ask you about, how do you deal with client resistance? If you, for example, see that there could be a productive path for a client, and the client resists it. So what's a recommended course of action in Jungian coaching?
Yeah, so that is very common. And again, for someone like me who is very drawn to these type of approaches to, visualization, and for me, that's so natural. Like I don't even have to think. For me, the opposite, when there's a more logical approach, I'm more resistant, right? And so what you are telling me is exactly right. As you are more logically oriented, and some clients are, and especially when, we work with leaders, corporations, with these types of environments that are much more logical and masculine in the sense of polarities. It's very common. And it's interesting to see that, when initially in, let's say, the first sessions, I see resistance, but as we go through the process and as the client starts to trust the techniques and see results and have insights, that's when, something shifts within, and I see the client really trusting more in the process and in the tools. Now, in the first few sessions, especially when I see resistance, first, I don't, force them to use any technique. So if they don't want to use, cards, or if they don't want to use images or whatever, then we go, we just again, we recontract, we talk, and we establish an agreement. How can we move forward from here, right? Let's not use this technique. Let's use something else. So there's not a problem at all. But then I also like to challenge them a little bit, and just also tell them what are the benefits of these techniques. Sometimes bring a little bit of science, the science of visualization, or other types of like facts, because I know they work more logically, so they need more facts, they need more information to then trust the tool. So I also do that work. If it's a client that has that need, I already come like more prepared for that, let's say. And I think that's a journey. You never, especially when we are working with the psyche, right? I think it's an exploration. I think it's a lot less predictable than the conscious mind. And that's why I said we need more that trust to go, and we will never know exactly what are the insights or what are the results that come from there, what is the information that we extract when we visit the unconscious mind. And I think that's why trust is so important. But again, it's a process. I don't think someone that is very logical in the first session will be totally open for the process, but that's okay. Like, as we adjust as we go, and we respect the client and the client's needs, and I think that's usually my approach.
Thanks for sharing. I think that supports the best practices of coaching overall, right? Very non-direct, very partnering approach where a person comes first and approach or tools always come second. So we don't need to fit the client into the approach, but we adjust the approach to fit the client. And I think that's very, very important. So I'm really glad that you brought up the topic of results, because I know that psychoanalytical work, right, when at least a therapy, it can last for years, and it can last indefinitely, probably, right? It's one of the deepest work that can take years and years. However, coaching usually lasts less than therapy, right? So I was curious about your typical arrangement in terms of the number of sessions or the number of weeks or months. Like, what seems effective to you as a Jungian coach, for this approach, and what results a client may or may not expect? Because I know that in coaching, we always say that it's more result oriented, right? So coaching works in the gap between A and B. And so basically the result of coaching is crossing the gap, or at least making some progress towards the desired state. So what do you think is the result of the Jungian coaching, and how long it takes, and just, maybe some more information about that?
Yeah. So I personally usually give them the freedom to choose the number of sessions. I usually have from 3 to 10 sessions, different options that they can choose from. A minimum of 3 sessions, even for any small thing that may want to work on. But that's the minimum that I work with a client, and they can use them like not also with too much distance in between, with too much space in between. But that's usually the minimum, and then 10 is usually a good number of sessions, in my opinion. I think it allows us to go really deep, and allows also the process, because I think Jungian coaching is a lot more about processes and patterns and systems, and it's obviously we want to achieve results, we want to achieve goals. That's still one of the major measures of success. We still want to make progress toward the goal, of course, but I think some processes we cannot really measure the same way, because when we work with the unconscious, when we work with the psyche, I think there are processes that you start and you don't necessarily have results right away, or they are not necessarily as obvious. And I think that also applies to conventional coaching, because there's a lot of changes that happen within the client that are not necessarily obvious during the session, that are not obvious even to them, and then down the line there's progress being made within themselves, right, in a certain direction. So I think in Jungian coaching that is more important to understand, is that like not all results will be very obvious right away, but I think changes can be really fast, because we work with the unconscious, and I think sometimes because you get insights that are really life-changing. It's we are about 90%, according to Jungian psychology, right? We are about 90% unconscious. So 90% of our behaviors, of everything we experience, is unconscious. We are not consciously aware of that. So that means that all the things, 90% of what is driving our decisions, what is driving our habits, what is driving everything that is motivating the way we perceive things, everything is unconscious. We are not consciously aware of it, right? And so for that reason, it's a much deeper, in my perspective, again, when we work with the unconscious, we get to work with the root cause instead of working with symptoms, with surface symptoms. And I think Jungian coaching is is kind of in the middle between, you know, traditional coaching, pure ICF coaching, and like approaches like therapy, because it acknowledges, I think in my perspective, it acknowledges more the past and what happened and the data that it's in the unconscious mind,
Yeah.
which is basically everything that happened to that individual throughout their lifetime, and even like beyond that, even before, you know. We could dig into that, right? But that's more intergenerational stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think because it acknowledges the past, it extracts information from the past, and then it brings it to the client's awareness. And then from there, we can actually, you know, with that new awareness, we can create an action plan. So an example that just came to my mind is a client that wants to exercise, wants to work out, wants to lose weight, but is not feeling motivated to lose weight. It's not working out. And my experience is with traditional coaching, if you don't go deeper into the root cause of the problem, you may create action plans, you may, you know, stay on the surface and really do a lot of apparent progress. Amazing, right? So the person goes a couple of times, maybe during the coaching sessions, you know, they look motivated and so on, but the truth is it's not sustainable. Like sooner or later they will sabotage themselves again, they will not do it, and that's because the root cause was not addressed. And so I think when we work with the unconscious mind and, you know, we find the root why the person is not exercising, and there's a deeper belief sometimes, you know, a belief that working out is not good, or, you know, maybe the father or the mother or whatever before them thought that working out was something really bad, or, you know, whatever it is, but there's a deeper cause, and if we don't address it, we just stay in the symptom level.
Thank you for sharing. I can relate to this story. You know, when I deliver coach training and we do live demos during our programs, and when I invite volunteers for live demos from the group, I will tell them, it must not be a topic related to exercise. It must not be a topic related to, I need to exercise more regularly, because this topic cannot be resolved in 20 minutes. It's not good for a demo, especially if you've tried everything, you've tried so many things, you can't still do it. I'm not taking these topics for a live demo, because we are only able to make a very surface level, very formal kind of progress. That's probably not going to stick. So you know, for me, that's a no-go. I can totally relate to everything you said about the value of process and life-changing insights that a person can get about their patterns. And as a practitioner, I totally get it. But as we are also, you know, as there's also an entrepreneurial side, coaching is also not just a hobby, it's business for many practitioners. I wanted to ask you this practical question: if this process makes it more difficult to market, or I guess to, you know, to explain the return on investment for our clients. So if they take 10 sessions, but they may still not get a result, but they may get some insights that they may not be aware of, that sounds like something very vague for a client. And I'm just assuming that. Maybe I'm wrong. So happy to hear your view on this.
I would say that you have a point in saying that, especially as a more logically inclined person. I think that's natural to see it that way. I personally, you know, I think as I am more inclined to these approaches, as a client, I've always been drawn to these approaches. I've always paid, you know, I pay a lot more money for these approaches than conventional or, you know, ICF coaching. So it depends. I think there's market for everything. I think there's space for all approaches. And I think it's important to market, you know, the like Jungian coaching also the right way, right? So I think the right people will get it. The people that resonate with this approach will get it and will be willing to pay for it, because they understand that, you know, there are results that are not necessarily as obvious, but that there are processes going on within, right? And I also think that globally, in terms of even leadership, I think there's a shift in paradigm. You know, there's a shift in how even corporations are thinking about coaching and leadership development, you know, conscious leadership and so on, happiness management. All these topics are coming more and more, and I think there's more, you know, there are conscious companies, conscious corporations, really new businesses that are also looking for these kind of approaches. So yeah, I do feel that there's more openness for that now more than ever. And I would say that, you know, the people that get it will be willing to pay for it. So I don't necessarily see that as a weakness. I also think, you know, when you add your own flavor of coaching, when you add your own tools, I think coaching is really, you know, you have a backbone, you have a structure, and then, you know, you follow a code of ethics, but then there's a part of coaching that is also your personality, your touch, and that's what makes it special, and that's what will connect you to the right clients as well. Because if everyone coaches the exact same way, first of all, it's not even possible, right? But it wouldn't, you know, mean as much, right? I think we all choose our own coaches, our own practitioners that way, right? It's through resonance as well, more than anything else. So yeah,
That's wonderful. I guess that was very, very valuable. And not only for me, but for many people who, especially newer coaches, or coaches who are choosing their niche and who are thinking, oh, how am I going to support this approach? Is there a market for that? Is it attractive for the client, right? But I guess what it comes down to, that people come to you as a coach, and approach is always secondary, right? You live your approach through everything that you do. And if people experience you within or outside of your approach, and they want to engage with you and they trust you enough, then they're going to go into the journey. And that was really well said. Thank you so much, Sofia. You know, I could talk to you for hours.
If I may add just a little thing, is I also think it's very important that the coach has done their own inner work, especially when it comes to Jungian coaching. of course, I'm not saying, it's something you do everything at once, right? I mean, inner work is something we do for a lifetime. Self-development coaching is something that, it's a constant, regular practice. But when it comes to Jungian coaching specifically, we touch a lot in the shadow work. It requires, I think, a level of vulnerability and looking at aspects of ourselves that are not necessarily as pleasant. And all of that, I think it really is important that the coach is very comfortable themselves with just seeing and just working with those topics, and there is not like awkwardness during the session because the coach is not ready for that level of vulnerability, or when a client cries, or when a client expresses deeper emotions or brings up a certain topic, right? So I think if I can give one advice is, like, if any coach that may be listening to us wants to join Jungian coaching, to learn Jungian coaching, first make sure that you are comfortable working on it for yourself, right? Especially the shadow aspect, because that will eventually come up during sessions as well. In Jungian coaching, there's this concept of projection, right? I think it's not only in Jungian
It's very
coaching.
common when we deliver supervision, for example, right? So with transference and counter-transference, there are very common processes, right, that arise, and you can't ignore them because they are there, right? They're very well studied.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a great addition. And on my part, I'm very happy that supervision is getting more and more popularity and support from larger coaching organizations, because that is, again, an invitation for coaches to work on themselves. And you're so right in saying that you need to have enough capacity to hold this container, to hold the space for everything that's happening in the client and in yourself and between you and in the field, right? There's a lot to hold. And I agree with you that the more a coach works on themselves in various ways, not necessarily through receiving training, coaching, mentoring, supervision, anything that helps them grow that capacity to be there for another person with all their complexity is definitely crucial when we speak about more mature coaching.
Yeah, and you mentioned before psychodrama, right? I just finished the drama course in Bangkok, and it was a great way to connect with my unconscious as well, and to explore myself in different ways, and to really, because as you play certain roles, there are certain things that come to the surface, there are certain triggers. It's very interesting. And I'm actually having soon to yoga teaching training, and I think that's also, another way that I find very useful to keep expanding my capacities to, again, just explore different modalities and filter what works for me, and what I can extract from that experience to then reach my coaching approach. So I think that's very important as well.
I totally agree. When you're a learner, the whole world is a book, isn't it?
Totally.
Sofia, I could talk to you for hours, and I can easily do another hour, just on top of this, to continue talking to you. It's so fascinating. And thank you so much for sharing your experience generously and genuinely. But I hope that our video is not too long for viewers now. So I guess it's time for us to wrap up. And if there's anything else that you'd like to share with those who'll be watching this video, now it's a good time to do this.
So I think we've explored quite a lot about Jungian coaching, and I think everyone inclined to that, again, should do their first foundational ICF or any other code of ethics course foundation first, but then go for Jungian coaching, explore it, see if you like it yourself, right? Experience it as a client. That would be very important. And then as well, if I may share my contact, if people have any questions or would like to reach out, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Nowadays is where I'm most active on, so you can find me as Sofia Xavier. It's my name on LinkedIn, and you can find a lot of more information there. And also my email is sofiaxavier@pikoacademy.org. That's my email. You can also send me an email, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for sharing, Sofia. We'll include all the links below the video to your LinkedIn page, to your email address, or any other contacts that you'd like to share with the audience. Everything will be right there. And thank you so much for your time today. It was an immense pleasure to have this conversation.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, Luba.